Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man reflects on his time as a boy when a strange event occurred in his small town. So are you lactose intolerant? If so, you might be one of the lucky ones, because there can be no milk.
A few months ago, the civil township of Wanley, NC, was officially revoked. The area's had a dwindling population for decades, and with less than a dozen people living there as of this writing, the town has been absorbed into a neighboring area. For most people, this is a footnote. No one really knew about Wanley. Hell, even the post office got confused at times. But that town used to be something, and the people who came from there are as real as it gets. I was one of those people, and I want to tell the story of what happened. In the 90s, Wanley was the home to approximately 3,800 people. The main export was corrugated steel roofing sheets, produced by the Wanley Metalworking Roofing and Tiles. There were the 2 dairy farms, the Ansons and the Bows. We also had a small barley and wheat refinery, a high school, 2 large off-site admin offices, and one of those small-scale business incubators. Apart from that, there wasn't much to see in Wanley. Just this flat chunk of land amid a big pile of nothing. In those days, people were already leaving town. Businesses were split between Fayetteville and Roseboro. A lot of people figured that there was no point making big investment plans for a town that was bleeding out. Hell, even Wanley Metalworking considered relocating south to Wilmington, abandoning their namesake. But despite all that sour gloom, it wasn't industry decisions that caused the downfall of Wanley. I was 13 years old in 1993. I grew up with my mom, Raniele, Ronnie for short, and my dad, Morgan. My little brother, Amos, had the room right across the hall. He was just 10 years old at the time. It was the last month of middle school. The following autumn, I was supposed to study at Wanley High. But for all of primary school, we had to take a bus out of town. It took us about 25 minutes one way. Not too bad, but it singled us out. Us Wanley kids were a unit at that point, arriving and leaving in unison. It was a Friday afternoon in late May. I was on the school bus, on my way back home. There were these 2 kids in front of me who couldn't stop talking about their latest Super Nintendo game, Star Fox, I think. I'd zoned out their entire conversation, instead opting to stare out the window. When we got to the Wanley town sign, I noticed something strange. There was a man from the sheriff's office using a roller to add something to the sign. All I saw was the word "no." There were several police vehicles blocking the road into town. I recognized the faces of the officers, but I hadn't talked to them before. There weren't a lot of criminals in Wanley, and my family were all on the straight and narrow. Even my dad, who joked about being a bank robber, he wasn't. He was a corporate lawyer. The bus stopped, and so did the conversation. No more Star Fox. The double doors at the front of the bus whooshed open, and an older policeman stepped on board with his hands on his walkie-talkie. He looked at the driver and nodded, then turned to us.
Hey there, kids,
he said.
I'm Officer Gellin. We're not going to keep you here too long. We just need to have a little talk, if that's okay. Is that okay, kids?
There was a muttering, "Yes," coming from the Wanley Middle School children, myself included. Officer Gellin nodded, hiding a wide smile under a wild mustache.
All right, I'll be right back. Sir, would you accompany me outside for a sec?
The driver stepped outside with Officer Gellin. Meanwhile, the rest of us kept looking around, trying to see what was wrong. "Maybe there's an accident," said one of the younger kids. "Maybe someone got hurt." "I think there's a fire," said another. "Mom says we can't barbecue because of fire hazard." "Maybe there's a murderer," said the Star Fox kid. "And they found like heads and stuff." "Gross," I added. "You're gross." I looked back outside as the other kids started to squabble. It went from fire to accident to murderers to space aliens, then right back to talking Star Fox. Meanwhile, I stared off in the distance, and that in turn gave me an idea. I could see the back of the town sign from the rear window. I leaned back and looked out. The sign read, "You're now leaving Wanley." But there was a large white text added to it. "No milk. Before I got the chance to tell the other kids, Officer Gellin came back on board. The driver got back in his seat.
I had a very productive talk with Mr. Harley here, and he tells me that I've stumbled upon a particularly crafty and well-behaved group of students. Is he right about that? Is that what you are?
Of course we were. In unison, we agreed with Officer Gellin.
Well, in that case, you might be able to help me out. See, we're looking for a special something that we can't bring into town or people might get sick. And we wouldn't want anyone to get sick now, would we?
Of course not.
Then I hope you won't mind some of my officers checking your backpacks to make sure nothing bad snuck along, would you?
2 officers stepped on board as Gellin hurried outside to halt an approaching sedan. Someone was trying to get out of town, but was turned away. One by one, the officers had a short talk with us and went through our backpacks, our lunches specifically. When they got to the Star Fox kid just ahead of me, I heard them asking him a series of questions. What he'd been eating, how long ago, if he'd gone to the bathroom since. Strange questions. Turns out, he had chocolate milk as part of his lunch. The officer who asked clicked his walkie-talkie twice, some sort of discreet signal. When they got to me, I handed them my backpack.
Have you had anything to drink today?
He asked. My mom made lemonade, I said.
That sounds great. Wish my mom made me some.
He smiled.
Anything to eat? Any cheese? Any milk?
Just fish sticks and rice, I said, and ketchup.
Doesn't sound too bad.
He rummaged through the backpack and seemed relieved not to find what he was looking for.
All right, looks like we're done. You have a good weekend now.
You too. Once they'd gone through every backpack, they circled back to the Star Fox kid. They asked him to come along and said they had to ask a couple more questions. It was scary. He started crying, and they tried to encourage him every step of the way. They said they were going to call his parents, and everything was going to be fine, and I wasn't so sure. Once the bus started rolling, I looked back to see Officer Gellin in the rear window. He wasn't smiling at me. He had this grim look on his face, staring straight into the asphalt, motionless. There was a long line of cars being turned away. Some cars I recognized. Friend and neighbors looking to make a quick exit. The bus had to pull to the side at one point to let a fire truck pass. I got the impression that something big had happened, but no one was telling me what it was. The conversation had died down, and I had to fill the silence with my worries. There was no chatter to distract me. By the time we got to the bus stop, I saw all our parents lined up, my mom and dad included. Amos was also there. He'd taken an earlier bus and had been home since lunch. As I stepped off, my dad swept me up in his arms. Mom was crying.
What did they do?
Dad asked.
Did they take anything? What did they ask you?
Mom took me from him.
Give it a rest, Morgan.
She spat.
Let's go home.
Amos seemed disinterested, instead clutching a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic that they'd bribed him with. There was a man in camouflage with an assault rifle walking up and down the street, asking people to disperse and return to their homes. Mom and Dad hurried back to the car, sticking me and Amos in the back. He went straight to reading his comic book, but I kept looking out the window. As we got back on the road, heading home, I noticed several strange signs. The most prominent one was on the window of a corner shop. No milk, by order of the National Guard. When we took the road by the Bowes Dairy Farm, I heard popping noises. Before I got the chance to ask, my dad intervened.
They're celebrating,
He said.
It's just fireworks.
We lived at the end of a street, next to a roundabout. We had 3 neighboring houses. 2 of them were elderly couples who rarely left their homes, and the last was another family with a teenage boy. We'd hung out a bit before he started high school, but we'd fallen out of touch in the last year or so. Still, I had fond memories of watching movies on their big screen TV and playing video games. I bet they had the new Star Fox game. As we turned the corner, the street was in chaos. The Masons were out on the lawn, arguing with 2 fire marshals. The other elderly couple, the Stevensons, were dragging bags to their car. The other family was nowhere to be seen, and their SUV wasn't in the driveway. Their front door was half open and the lock broken. There was a piece of white paper with red text nailed to the side of the door.
Just go to your room,
Dad said.
We'll talk over dinner.
But what's going on? I asked.
We'll talk about it later.
He insisted.
For now, I need you to stay in your rooms.
Amos looked up from his comic book.
Can I play Nintendo?
As long as you want, honey.
Mom smiled.
And tonight, there's no bedtime.
Amos looked up at me like we were going to Disneyland. It took him a moment to realize that he was the only one smiling and he didn't understand why. To be fair, neither did I. We hurried inside. Amos and I ran upstairs and got to our rooms. Amos had been allowed to keep the Super Nintendo in his room, while I had a VCR. It was fair enough. He could play games and I could watch movies. But I wasn't in the mood to watch anything. I had this sinking feeling that something was terribly wrong, and I kept looking out the window, hoping to see something. The Stevensons were arguing next to their car, and the Masons were being ushered back into their house. I could see smokestacks rising from the dairy farms and flashing lights from fire trucks going back and forth down Main Street. Every now and then, if I listened closely, I could hear popping noises. It didn't sound like fireworks. It sounded like gunshots. I'd only been in my room for a couple of minutes before I heard a careful tapping at the door. Amos stepped in with this haunted look on his face, his eyes wide and unblinking.
Can you help me with my science project?
He asked.
It's acting funny.
Amos had been working on a science project for school. It wasn't a big deal. He'd taken different kinds of milk and placed them in cups to see which ones went bad first. He usually checked it before he went to bed, making notes about changes over time.
Can you please look?
He asked.
It's really weird.
All right. For something to make Amos say please, it had to be something out of the ordinary. I walked across the hall to his room, catching a whiff of an argument downstairs. Mom had raised her voice. There was a certain pitch to it when she was worried about something. She wasn't holding back this time. It made me feel sorry for Dad. Half the time, it wasn't even him she was angry at. I followed Amos past the pause screen for Contra 3 and up to the window. He had the cups resting on a small metal tray with plastic wrapping. He stopped just ahead of it. I heard this noise, and he pointed at the cups, clutching his notebook.
I haven't opened it. Mom says it smells too much.
As I approached, I saw the cups rattle. Not much, but enough to make a noise. I could see the plastic wrap shaking. Looking into the cups, it took me a while to understand what I was looking at. At first I thought it was maggots, but it wasn't. It looked like something had coalesced at the bottom of each cup, and there were these tiny white strands shooting out of it, prodding the plastic for weaknesses. It sort of looked like an egg, in a way, with these inches-long strands that moved independently of one another. All of it milky white.
It keeps moving.
He said.
Look!
He stepped up to it and put his finger on top of the plastic. The strands in the cup immediately reacted, shooting straight up. It looked almost electric in a way.
Why does it do that?
He asked. Don't touch it, I said, and we gotta put it away.
Should we tell Mom?
I could hear them arguing downstairs and shook my head. We should throw it away, I said. Let's flush it. Amos protested all the way to the bathroom, but didn't want to make a fuss. I told him I'd take the blame, and he could go back to playing Contra. That seemed to do the trick. I placed the tray on the floor next to the toilet. I put on Mom's plastic cleaning gloves just in case. As I took off the plastic wrap, those little white strands shot out of the cup, aiming straight at my face. They were a lot longer than I'd suspected, just inches away from my face. I panicked and dropped the entire cups down the toilet with a squeal. Looking down, they squirmed and twisted back and forth, these white strands whipping back and forth, like worms in agony. They were so much longer than I'd anticipated, and I could feel them prodding against the plastic gloves. They were looking for the warmth of my skin. The tips were much sharper than anticipated, and almost poked a hole in my gloves. I flushed. After waiting a few seconds, I could still see some strands moving at the bottom of the bowl. I flushed again and again and again. Finally, when there was nothing left, I dumped half a bottle of toilet cleaner in, flushed again, and then waited. I must have sat there for 10 minutes, just watching the water. There was this tingle in my spine, like I'd escaped some great danger. The same kind of rush you'd get if you'd nearly stepped on a snake or seen a bear. I went back to my room and brought out a notebook. No milk, I wrote at the top. I tried to name all the places in town where there might be a lot of milk or milk-based products. The dairy farms were obvious, but there was also the high school cafeteria, the corner shop with the soft serve machine, and the convenience store. Since this was a town with several dairy farms, milk and cheese was sort of everywhere. I listed at least 24 locations where there might be a lot of dairy products. There was a loud banging on the front door downstairs. Amos and I rushed out of our rooms to see what was going on. From upstairs, I saw Dad open the door to a man in military uniform. Mom looked up the stairs.
Get back to your rooms.
She said.
We'll tell you when you can come out, all right?
Mom, what's going on?
Just play your games.
She said.
Wait there.
But Mom,
Rooms!
She yelled.
Now!
She wasn't messing around. Amos and I looked at one another and silently decided to stick together on this one. There was a discussion between my parents and the man at the door. Amos and I retreated back to my room. He tried reading, but he kept getting distracted.
You think it's bad?
He asked, putting down his comic book. Amos had always been a bit of a pain. Lots of pranks and scares, but this time was different. We weren't playing around. It was like a silent agreement. Yeah, I said, I think so.
Why? What's so bad?
I think there's something wrong with the milk.
But you flushed it, right?
Not just that milk, I said, all of it, all milk in town.
It's all gone bad?
Worse, I said, like real bad. What happened next was quick. I heard someone coming up the stairs, and in the next moment, my parents opened the door to my room. They asked us to remain calm. They asked us to be quiet. They asked us to come along, stay close, and don't ask any questions. On our way out, I saw the man in uniform stepping into our upstairs bathroom. Seconds later, he sprinted back out, yelling into his walkie-talkie. Mom and Dad hurried us downstairs. 3 other men rushed past us, up the stairs, dragging dirt and mud through the living room carpet on their way up. All in uniform, all armed with assault rifles. They left the front door open, and I could see at least 6 more people waiting outside. We got in our car, taking nothing with us except Amos's comic book. A man tapped the driver's seat window with his rifle, and my dad took off down the road.
We can't get out of town.
Mom said, keeping her voice low.
Morgan, they're testing women at the checkpoints.
Maybe it's for the better.
Dad said.
Who knows how this can affect you? You might need a vaccine.
You've seen what they did with the dairy cows. They take them out back, and then...
We are not cattle, Raniel. They're not putting people Ranny out to pasture.
Then where the hell are the goddamn Abernathys? Them being dragged off was just for fun? For show?
We're not having this discussion.
Dad said.
Not in front of the kids?
I'm almost in the 2nd trimester.
She whispered.
And God knows what they'll do if they...
Mom quieted down, holding a hand to her mouth. Dad looked at her with a mix of pity and frustration.
I feel strange, Morgan.
She continued.
And it's not like last time.
There's this big 4-way intersection in the middle of the downtown area. When we got to that point, the lights had turned red. There were these military trucks going by, one by one, at least a dozen, covered in blue plastic tarps. Long after the lights turned green, the trucks were still going by. As the second to last truck was going by, there was this loud metal bang, and the entire truck started moving. For a moment, we all thought it was going to tip over. 2 of the wheels were off the ground, tipped back down, and the driver leaned on the horn. From seemingly every corner of the street, armed men started shouting at us to move. I could see something moving under the tarp, something sharp poking and prodding against the plastic. I'd seen it before. Dad stepped on the gas, going the other way. I saw the high school gymnasium in the distance, lined with vehicles all along the street.
They told us to stay here.
Dad said.
Let's just hunker down and wait.
We'll be trapped.
We can leave at any time.
We can't go by foot. I don't like the look of those rifles.
You know they wouldn't.
They exchanged a glance, and the conversation stopped. Amos and I just kept our heads down. There were still popping sounds outside. They were closer now. Dad found a spot further down the street, and we made our way to the gymnasium. There were at least 100 people gathered outside. I picked up a few things from various discussions going around. For example, the armed men were from the National Guard. Most of them had shown up early that morning, probably minutes after I'd left for school. There was a lot of talk from a lot of people. A soldier explaining something about lactic acid bacteria to one of our science teachers. An old man complaining about how they took his freezer. A kid being scolded for not telling his mom he had a milkshake with his lunch. A farmhand looking distraught, saying something about the new cow feed used at the Anson farm, and how it was unfair for the Bows to get shut down. Bits and pieces of 100 different stories. But what struck me the most was a group of young women looking distraught. One of them kept repeating the same thing over and over to a soldier.
I'll never get rid of it.
She asked.
It's in there? For good?
We had to sign our names on the way in. Dad signed for the 4 of us. I barely recognized anyone. They'd set up green military cots, 2 by 2, with a basic footlocker for valuables and personal belongings. Dad weaved between aisles of cots, keeping me and Amos close. Mom was looking for the restroom.
When can we go back to the house?
Amos asked.
They're checking the pipes.
Dad said.
That can take a while.
Checking the pipes for what?
I don't know, but whatever it is, they're making sure we're okay.
A stone sunk into my stomach. Maybe what I'd flushed down the toilet had gotten stuck in the pipes somehow. Maybe that's what they saw. For the next few hours, we stayed put. They handed out a couple of basic dairy-free meals. Once every 2 hours, there were a couple of soldiers walking down the aisles, making sure everyone looked okay. But people were far from okay. I saw this one athletic guy shaking like a leaf, coughing into his hand over and over. It sounded awful, like his body was trying to push something out. When the patrol made their rounds, they took him outside. I didn't see him again. Mom was in the bathroom for a long time, at least an hour. When she got back, she had this slightly ashen complexion, like she hadn't slept for days. Dad was worried, but she kept telling him she was okay. Once it started to get dark, the patrol said they were closing down for the night. A curfew was in effect. Dad had all kinds of questions, but didn't want to start arguing with armed soldiers. I could tell he was holding back. Corporate lawyer or no, personal freedoms are a big sticking point to him. I remember this big clock over the scoreboard. If you managed to filter out the cries and the occasional scream, that clock was the only thing you could hear. And I could swear that the seconds were getting longer the more you listened to it. Mom and Dad shared a cot, while Amos and I got one each. Amos went out like a light, but I stayed up long after midnight. I couldn't help it. That damn clock kept me up. With the lights off, all I saw was the sharp shadows cast by the crescent moon creeping in through the cloud cover. As the screams and cries turned to sniffles and snores, I was left awake staring into the ceiling. I heard people whispering about megabacteria, something in the methane, the lactic acid, the gas lines. Nobody knew for sure. There was one guy who kept muttering about birds being the source, claiming it had rained feathers moments before. Shit hit the fan. There was this one drunk man by the exit who kept talking out loud to himself.
They dance like skinny little worms reaching for the stars.
Skinny little worms. Just like I'd seen in my brother's science project. I'd been drifting in and out of sleep for 1 or 2 hours when I snapped to attention. I heard someone running past me and looked up to see Mom's side of the cot empty. Dad sat up, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes.
Ronnie?
He whispered. He noticed me looking his way.
You see where Mom went?
I shook my head. He got up and took me by the hand.
Let's go look.
We went down the aisles, hand in hand. It was eerie watching all these strangers sleeping around us, like nothing was going on. Even the drunk guy by the exit was out cold by now. I don't know if I was imagining things, but I had the mental image of those skinny little worms appearing. Sometimes, when I looked at the sleeping people, I imagined little shadows scurrying to hide. Something crawling out of a nose, an ear, a mouth. We walked past this one man who looked sick, who had a metal bucket next to his cot. I could hear little tapping movements at the bottom of it, as if something was struggling to reach out.
She might be in the bathroom,
Dad said.
Let's go look.
There were 2 patrolmen by the bleachers, smoking and telling stories. They kept passing a bottle back and forth. Dad kept his head down, making sure not to look them in the eye. We went through a short hallway and made it to the bathrooms. The power was still on, but all the lights were off, making the emergency exit sign the only thing to guide us. Dad was about to step inside the bathroom when I tugged on his sleeve. "That's for ladies, Dad," I said.
I'm sure they won't mind.
We stepped through the door. Moonlight was coming in from a frosted glass window, casting an eerie shadow across the floor. We split up and started knocking on the stalls. It was quiet. Dad had this worried look on his face.
Maybe you should step outside for this,
He said,
just for a while.
"Let's check," I said. "It'll be quick."
Wait, let's...
I opened one of the stalls. I barely saw anything. In the moonlight, I couldn't see much more than outlines. I saw a pair of still hands holding up a bloated belly with these dancing little worms pushing their way out of the skin. Like a goddamn human garlic press. The tapping sound of 100 thin parasites looking for a new host. Some were just an inch long, others were as tall as an arm. One of them poked the nail on my thumb, but couldn't latch on. I saw chunks of hair strewn across the floor, a side effect of late-stage infection. A hand fell over my eyes, and I was dragged outside. When I looked up, I saw Dad. His entire body language had changed, like he was in pain. For a few seconds, all he did was stare at me. Then, there was a bang on the door, coming from the inside.
I need you to get your brother,
He said.
I need you to get your brother, and I need you to get to the car.
"But Dad, what?"
Here,
He handed me the car key.
I'm trusting you, and I need you to hurry.
"But what about..." Another bang on the door. Dad straightened his back and pushed it shut. I stepped back, feeling my pulse rise through my chest.
Go!
He yelled.
I'll meet you outside.
Running back out, some of the cloud cover had cleared outside. I started running down the aisles, trying to find my way back to Amos. It was difficult. Everything looked different in the dark. There was this woman who got out of her cot just a few feet ahead of me. She coughed, and this avalanche of worms trickled out of her mouth. They spilled onto her chest and scattered across the floor. She turned to me, chunks of hair coming off her scalp. She wheezed at me, her brown eyes tired from crying. She tried to say something, to call for help. But all I heard was that inhuman wheezing, as little white worms made their way across her chest. I don't know if I was the one who started it, but someone did. That first scream, that choir of screams as lives came crashing down. There were so many parasites, so many victims. Some who'd just felt funny and tried to sleep it off, waking to a nightmare. Others had tried keeping their sickness a secret. There were no patterns, no limits. Everyone was susceptible. Young, old, strong, frail. There were some with parasites coming out their stomachs, others through the ears, mouth, and nose. There was this one man who had them in his left eye. As they reached out to others for help, the parasites spilled from one person to the next, burrowing into their skin. I didn't find Amos. He found me. He kept telling me that a bad man had taken his comic book, and that he ran away looking for Dad and help. He asked 100 questions at once, but I just grabbed him and ran, clutching the car keys so hard that my hand cramped. We made our way to the exit, but there was a rush of people going in and out like a waterfall. Someone yelled, telling people to drop to the floor. 10 others screamed back, begging for help. Others just screeched like wounded animals trying to alert the flock of incoming danger. Amos ducked to the floor and I followed him. Then the gunshots started. We got out by crawling on all fours. One of the soldiers tripped over me, accidentally kicking me across the ribs. When we got outside, we stuck to the wall and kept a low profile. Amos couldn't stop crying, but I just pulled him along. I could barely hear anything over my ringing ears and pounding pulse as gunshot after gunshot rang out behind us. We crawled our way through the flower beds, using the high school's blue sunflowers as cover. Most people were stuck inside. Some made their way out, filtering back into the military tents outside. Amos and I made our way back to the car. My fingers barely worked as I fumbled to open the door. When I finally did, I could see more people heading our way from down the road. I got the car open and pushed Amos into the back seat. I followed him, locking the doors from the inside. We curled into the leg space between the back and front seat, hugging each other tight as I hushed him. He couldn't stop crying. He had so many questions piling up that they were overflowing into a jumbled mess. Questions about Mom, about Dad, about the people outside, about the bad man who took his comic book. As the gunfire died down, people started pouring out. But they weren't just people anymore. One of them noticed our car. One of them spotted us inside. And after that first one came another and then another. In less than half an hour, there were so many of them, they were blocking all the windows. All I saw were silhouettes, and all I heard were wheezing noises. Bodies calling for help, begging, pressing themselves against the windows to get at us. Rattling coughs over and over, as something inhuman settled in their throats. I could only see parts of them as they banged on our windows. There was this one man smiling at me with little worms dancing between the gaps in his yellow teeth. He pressed himself against the passenger window, meeting my gaze.
Batman!
He groaned.
Batman! Help!
An eternity passed in the back of that car, and sometime during that eternity, the noises stopped. Maybe they moved on. Maybe they got shot. I don't know. But at some point, the sun broke through, and we were both okay. Panicked, but okay. There were soldiers outside, rounding up people from the gymnasium, and people from the tents. Some were sent back home after signing some documents. Others were asked to stay near their vehicles until further notice. And me? Well, I refused to open the door for anyone. Amos and I stayed in there for hours until we could feel the heat baking us. Then, the door opened. My dad had a spare set of keys. Seeing his familiar face outside the passenger side window was everything I needed to know that in some way we'd be okay. He'd locked himself in one of the stalls and kept quiet all night. Looking back at it, he and everyone else were forced to sign some kind of agreement. We were given a hefty compensation, and all we could say was that it was killer bacteria coming from one of the dairy farms, which in a sense was true, but it didn't tell the whole truth. And it took Dad years to build up the courage to tell me what really happened to Mom. 6 years, I think. Apparently she was pregnant, but the whole thing had been a bit touch and go. They didn't want to tell us until they were sure. She was just at the point where her body had started lactating. Milk protein just... I don't know. I can't shake the feeling that maybe it was her that I saw in that stall. Dad took the money and left town. He and so many others. Some moved in, encouraged by the sudden price drop. I guess that's how the town made it all the way to 2023. 176 people died in total, directly or indirectly. But what they don't tell you is that thousands were permanently scarred. Some of the girls who'd just entered puberty had to get sterilized, or they might risk another outbreak years down the line. They did some tests on me as well, but determined I was fine. Amos too. Guys are affected differently. I still have that bacteria in me in some capacity. While I can eat and drink dairy nowadays, there's that part of me that just can't bring myself to try. The thought of reliving any part of that day gives me this sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach. I feel my pulse rising just thinking about it. Seeing that white liquid fills me with the sense that there is so much moving around in it that I just can't see. If it hadn't been for what happened that day in 1993, I think Wanley would have been fine. But as it stands, I'm glad it's finally gone.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a woman gets a job for a ward when she starts to hear weird sounds coming from the nursery. So do you trust your babies with the hospital? Because there's a strange machine in the nursery.
My mother died when I was 12 years old. It was the single most traumatic experience of my life, and I'd be lying if I said I've gotten over it. But that isn't what has affected me most lately. Whenever a parent dies, most people just talk about the death itself. There's a lot of how and when, but not a lot of then what happened. It is that lasting legacy of what happens afterwards that really marks you for life. As my dad had to pick up extra hours to make ends meet, I had to help take care of my sisters. At that age, I barely made my own bed. Now I had to cook and bug my sisters about taking their showers. My younger sisters were far more depressed than I was. I didn't have time to be depressed. I had shit to do. So now, as an adult, I can kind of see that I got stuck in that rut. I'm still taking care of people, Maybe I'm afraid of what'll happen if I stop. Originally, I wanted to be a doctor, but we just couldn't afford that kind of education. I considered studying abroad, but my sisters still needed me long into their teenage years. Instead, I studied to become a nurse, which was the cheaper option. No less work, though. Just slightly cheaper. Once my sisters and I moved out, I got my own place, and I bounced around various hospitals and nursery homes around the state. I've worked at a rehab clinic, an open clinic, as an in-home nurse. All kinds of positions. I had 8 different jobs all in all, changing back and forth between them as one closed and another opened. But it wasn't until a few years ago that I saw an opportunity for a stable job. The biggest hospital in my home area had an opening for a nurse in the maternity ward. While I hadn't worked there before, I knew most of the procedures around the LDR rooms and the NICU unit. Sorry, I'll stop with the abbreviations. I got my first interview just days after the wanted ad went up. I was called in to talk with 2 of the nurses and one of the doctors. I could tell it was sort of rushed, and it all seemed like a bit of a formality. By the way they acted, I figured they could really use the help right away. Especially Dr. Gellin, who never even sat down. She was asking me questions while still pacing around the room. Surprise, surprise, I got the job. Starting Monday the following week, I got my first tour of the place. The first few weeks, I would mostly act as a helping hand while they figured out a more static position for me. In the meantime, I'd be moving from nurse to nurse, assisting them one by one. I didn't really have any responsibility of my own at first. The first few days I spent with Dr. Gellin, helping out in the LDR. I have pretty good bedside manners, and several expecting mothers were happy to have me distract them from whatever they were going through. I also had to run a few tests, sit in on ultrasounds, and help deliver some bad news. I don't want to go into details, but pregnancy isn't always this amazing and beautiful thing. After a few days, I helped out in the reception. Then, at the emergency room, and so on and so on. After about a month of working there, I had been pretty much everywhere but the nursery. You know, the fancy room with the glass windows where newborns rest up. I had seen it in passing once, but it was sort of off limits to newbies like me. There's a lot you must be aware of when working with someone that helpless. It was when I was assisting Nurse Rena that I finally took my first steps into the nursery. It was this large square room with several units lining the walls, well lit, with cheerful colors. It was empty when we went in there, having been cleared out for a proper spring cleaning, so it was a bit eerie.
We usually have half a dozen or so in here at a time,
Said Rena.
a few more around August and September.
I was a bit distracted. I kept hearing this strange noise.
You with me?
She asked.
What did I just say?
Sorry, I sighed. There's this noise.
There's gonna be plenty of noise.
She groaned.
You better get used to it.
No, it's like... It was hard to describe. It seemed to come from the center of the room. Some sort of machine noise. A broken vent? A thump. Some kind of machine, I continued.
Focus. What did I say?
It was there. Somewhere in the middle of the room, but what was it? Sorry, I smiled. One more time? As we left the room, the noise stayed in the back of my mind. It felt familiar somehow. But from where? The following days, things were getting busy. About half the patients we received had either some sort of condition or were oddly particular about their care. One woman had her partner sing-scream some kind of poem, for example. They had to be escorted out of the room. Another woman refused to have her baby without her favorite plant on the bedside table. Never seen a blue sunflower before. Never saw the kid either, for that matter. I was still assisting Rena in the nursery, and I got the opportunity to spend some time alone in that room. Even days later, the sound persisted. It was low, more like a hum, but it was definitely there. I thought it might be a heating issue, but I couldn't locate where it was coming from. I suspected the ceiling, but it had this strange echo to it that made it just as prominent near the floor. Strange. At one point, we had 5 kids in the nursery at the same time. Rena had the main responsibility, but she took me along every now and then just to quiz me and see how well I fared on my own. But now that there were little patients in there, she had no tolerance for mistakes or hesitation. One Friday night, as I was working the evening shift, I went into the nursery to roll out one of the children. Rena was already halfway down the hall, calling out to Dr. Gellin. So I had this short moment completely alone with all 5 kids. The lights were a bit dimmer, and at first I didn't notice anything. But after a few seconds, I could hear that sound again. But there was something else. As I looked around the room, I could see all the kids breathing in sync with the sound. Little chests heaving up and down. I gently pushed one of the units, accidentally waking up my little patient. As she stirred, she let out a soft cry, and for a moment, my mind blanked. I was just standing there in the middle of the room, and it felt like I was about to do something. And the machine noise was louder than ever. The kids were stirring. Maybe they could hear it too? It started to bother me. I asked a whole bunch of staff about it, but no one seemed to have any idea of what I was even talking about. If anything, the nursery was the quietest room in the entire ward. It had to be. You don't want to wake the patients. So when I started rambling about machine noises, they all just sort of tuned out. Even Dr. Gellin. Even after my time with Nurse Rena was up, I started coming back to the nursery every now and then. Sometimes, on my lunch break, I'd just stand there and listen, trying to find the source of the sound. That's actually how I got started here on Reddit. I started asking other medical professionals what that noise could be, and no one had a clear idea. I tried recording it, but it just wouldn't stick. Also, it is generally frowned upon to stand with a cell phone in the nursery, recording what could be a video. Big no-no. I went back over and over again, and it actually landed me in a bit of trouble. I had a private meeting with Dr. Gellin, who tried their best to understand my strange fascination with the nursery. Finally, I had to agree to leave my phone in my locker. I didn't go back there for a long time, but it was inevitable. The nursery is somewhat central to the entire ward, and you have to actively avoid it to never pass it. One night, as I was passing the glass window, I stopped to listen. But that time, I had a good reason. There were 4 kids in there, and they were the first thing I heard. Not the strange machine noise. The kids were crying, but they were crying in unison. Short bursts of screams. It was rhythmic in a way. I stopped to listen, and my mind immediately returned to the noise. I was sure that if I stepped inside, I'd hear the noise again. The kids. They were screaming in unison with the sound. I could feel it. And that was just the start. I could start feeling it even at home. I'd get frustrated whenever I heard my washing machine, as it was out of sync with the sound that haunted the back of my mind. Every rhythmic noise I heard just seemed off by comparison. It bothered me just how stuck that sound was, and I still had no idea what it was. And where had I heard it before? It came to a point where I sat up all night listening to a 4-hour recording of a construction site. Nothing. Nothing sounded like that goddamn machine. Ka-ka-ka-chung. At the end of a particularly long shift, as I was changing into my ordinary clothes, I stopped to listen to the hum of a fluorescent light in the bathroom. I could almost hear the rhythm of the electricity, and right there, behind my eyelids, was that rhythmic thumping again. I held my breath, and it felt like the sound was growing louder. I could feel my pulse go up. Why was I getting angry? Or was it fear? But it was real. The sound was real. The longer I closed my eyes, the clearer it was. With my eyes closed, I turned my head. The sound changed pitch. There, a direction where it was louder than ever. Loud enough to change the beat of my heart. It was coming from the nursery. God damn it. I slammed my locker shut and hurried out. I had to get to the bottom of this. The sound was so prominent that I could just close my eyes and it'd be there. It was beating in rhythm with my heart. I didn't care about anyone seeing me. I had to find out what it was. As I burst into the nursery, the newborns woke up. There were 7 of them in total. One by one, they started screaming. A steady, rhythmic scream. How had no one noticed this? How was I the only one? Ka-chung. Scream. Ka-chung. Scream. It wasn't a pained scream, more like a chant. This primal, instinctual grunt scream, almost melancholic. The sound grew louder, and my chest was pounding harder and harder. I thought I was having a heart attack. My fingers were aching, like someone was slowly turning my nerves counterclockwise. I didn't even realize it at first, but I was screaming too, to the rhythm of the grinding machine. I closed my eyes as hard as I could, trying to force the sound out of my head. Instead, it became clearer, and there, in the dark of my closed eyelids, I could finally see. It was a strange feeling, looking around the room with closed eyes. There were lines of beetles on the floor, reaching from the unit of every newborn to a spot in the middle of the room. It was clear as day, despite the darkness of my closed eyes. Black and gray beetles, marching to the rhythm of the machine, carrying little globs of white. And in the middle of the room was the source of the noise. From the side, it didn't look like much. It was sort of a pipe, with a faint yellow shine. It was about 3 feet wide, positioned in the center of the room. Line after line of beetles dove into it, the little globs of white falling out of their mouths. Despite my body screaming for me to get away, to get out, to take a breath, I had to look. With my eyes closed, I crawled forward. I looked down the pipe. It is strange not being able to close your eyes to make something go away. When you watch a scary movie, you can turn away. You can hide behind a pillow. But looking down that pipe, there was nothing I could do. I couldn't turn away, and my eyes were already closed. It is hard to describe. It was deep. Impossibly deep. Somewhere, miles below, there was a fire so bright that it burned my closed eyes. I could barely see it, shrouded behind hundreds of cogwheels, chains, live wires, and steam pipes. I just stared, watching the little beetles tumble over the edge, bumping against the absurd machinery. I could hear the little clicks and clacks of their shells as they struck the moving parts. Ka-ka-ka-chung. Something was moving. Something organic. Something living. There were hands reaching towards me. Hands getting burned on steaming pipes, getting mangled by cogwheels. But still, it kept coming upwards. I hadn't even realized that I'd stopped breathing. I'd held my breath for so long that I was getting lightheaded. I was being pulled away from the center of the room, away from the machine. Something pushed against my back, forcing air back into my lungs. There was a distant voice. 2 people were carrying me. My eyes opened, and I could see the nursery with my open eyes again. All 7 kids were lying on the floor, outside of their units. They were screaming at the top of their lungs, just like me. They heard it. I heard it. But somehow, I think they knew more about it than I did. I was carried away. They tried to get me to breathe again, but it was like my body forgot how to do it. It wasn't until I got a mask over my face, forcing air into my mouth, that I snapped back to reality. My heart was hammering away so fast and hard that my head hurt. I had no feeling in my hands, and both my feet had fallen asleep. My face was burning hot. Dr. Gellin was shining a light in my eyes, but it felt so far away. For a split second, I blinked. And there, in the darkness, I sensed something. It was a different shade of dark. It had followed me here. It was so impossibly tall, able to cross the room in just a few steps. As it reached for me, beetles tumbled onto my chest. Little globs of white getting ripped from my chest. Then, nothing. I must have passed out. They say it was some kind of psychotic episode. Hyperventilation, seizures. It didn't look good. I could no longer be around the children, so they were gonna have to either fire me or find somewhere else for me to go. It took me 2 days to recover, and I was so scared to close my eyes that they had to give me eye drops. My hands cramped from grasping the side of the bed, terrified of being picked up or pulled away in the middle of the night. At times, I could almost feel the little beetles crawling over me, picking globs of shining white out of me. Sometimes I felt the presence of something in the room. Even with closed eyes, I was scared to look. Some things can't be unseen. I was going to have a short interview with Dr. Gellin about the incident, but he was swamped that day. Instead, I got to talk to the chief physician, an older man who was a full head shorter than me. He asked me several questions about my medical history and my experience. It didn't really lead anywhere. That is, until we started rounding off the interview. As I read my social security number to him, to make sure he had my insurance info, he stopped.
Were you born in the area?
He asked. I guess, I said. You can tell?
The area number.
He nodded.
It is quite unique. There are 3 hospitals that cover that area, but 2 didn't have fully staffed maternity wards at the time you were born.
Handing my papers back to me, he gave me a long look.
You were born here, in this hospital, weren't you?
He asked. I had no idea, but it made sense. Mom had lived in this town all her life. I just nodded. He didn't respond. Instead, he just looked at me and sighed. Without a word, the meeting ended. The following week, I lost my job. While one could think it was because of my psychotic meltdown, I'm pretty sure it was because of that meeting with the chief physician. I think he knows something. If I had been born there, maybe I'd been in that room long, long ago, before I could even form memories. But if so, how could that noise sound so familiar? This was a few months ago, but I'm still looking for answers. That, and I think I'm going insane. I can still hear the click-clacking of little beetles falling to their deaths, and if I concentrate hard enough, I can hear the machine. It is not a memory. It is always there. I think there's a piece of me down there, inside it, still connected. Something listening, from the inside. Something that hurts. Little globs of white. I don't know what to make of this. I just want it out of my head. Some days I can distract myself enough not to hear it, but other days I can barely hear myself talk. It is always there, no matter what. It is like a rhythmic, haunting tinnitus. But I know there's more to it. Sometimes as I close my eyes, I can still see a faint glow in the distance. Sometimes not even in the direction of the hospital. Sometimes it is closer. Sometimes it has eyes. But the sound is the same. Always the same.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man who starts a woodworking class gets a visit from someone who has intentions of doing more than just cutting wood. So, if you need work done, make sure not to call the copycat carpenter.
For a few years, I've worked as a private contractor. My grandfather taught me to be a woodworker, carpenter. Grandma used to say I could properly use a dowel before I could talk, but I think they might have exaggerated a bit. Still, I love making things with my hands. That passion has given me quite a lot over the years. A family, a home, a steady job, a 68-foot Dodge Charger. What more can you ask for? That is, until not too long ago, when I got a bit more than I asked for. When the COVID pandemic hit, there were a lot of people who lost their jobs. My firm was pretty much fine, as people needed to fix up their houses to make it through an entire year indoors. There was also a rising interest in custom furniture, so we got a lot of special orders. I felt kind of bad for doing so well, so I decided I wanted to do something to give back to the community. So, for those people who lost their jobs, I decided to start a woodworking class. My wife loved it. I got to use the wood shop at a local high school after just a few short talks with the principal. I put up flyers around town, posted some ads on social media, and asked my daughters to spread the word in their class. We still made sure to adhere to safety standards, so there could only be 10 people at a time, and we were spread out far and wide. It took me less than a month to put it all together, and sooner than I realized, I was a teacher. It was easier than I thought it'd be. As soon as I started talking about what I loved, I was unstoppable. One by one, I asked my students what they wanted to make. Robert, an older man, wanted to make a pool cue. Donna, a stay-at-home mom, wanted to make a patterned rolling pin. Everyone had their own idea. Then there was Roy. Was somewhere in his 40s. He was skinny, had a slight limp, and a face that just screamed that he'd been punched a few times too many. He had a surprisingly deep voice with rolling R's, black hair like a wet crow. "So what do you want to make, Roy?" I asked. "Any ideas?"
What do you want?
He asked back.
Me? I'd make a...
He surprised me, but I thought about it. I tried to figure out something that a guy like Roy could make use of. I thought about a baseball bat or something sporty, but he didn't seem like the type. I winged it. "A shoehorn," I said. "What do you think?"
Maybe.
He nodded.
A shoehorn.
"Or maybe a spice rack?" I continued, weighing his reaction. "Painted something nice, something that matches your kitchen."
Then I'll make a spice rack.
Said Roy, rolling the R in rack. That's how our first class started. I went through the tools, and everyone was free to bring their materials over to the shop to make their project. They could also make them at home and come in for feedback. It was all very casual and free-form. Most of them were excited, and I had a few talks about what tools to use, what to look for, and even what channels to check out online. We started making step-by-step plans to finish our projects in time for our 5th and final session. During all this time, Roy didn't do anything. He didn't make any plans, he didn't make any sketches, he never asked any questions. He just stood there, nodding his head, rolling his R's. Sure, he was going to make a spice rack, he said, but he had nothing to show for it. 5 sessions came and went, and everyone had something to present. Robert finished his pool cue, and Donna made an amazing star pattern for her rolling pin. Roy, on the other hand, had nothing. "Didn't you finish your project?" I asked.
I did.
He said.
I just didn't bring it.
Again, that rolling R in bring made me shiver, not in the good way.
"We'd love to see it,"
Robert said.
"It's okay if it isn't perfect."
But it is.
Nodded Roy.
It is perfect.
He rolled the R in perfect just a little bit too long. Robert was clearly uncomfortable. Once my first group of students finished, the next batch signed up. A lot of younger folks this time, a majority under 18. And to my surprise, a returned student, Roy. While Julianne and Greg wanted to make a chessboard and a wall shelf, Roy didn't want to make anything. Instead, he just asked me again.
What do you want to make?
This time I said a ladder, a tool, something practical. Roy agreed. The weeks passed one after another, and the same thing happened. Roy kept showing up empty-handed, while the other students just looked at him funny. Greg made his shelf from solid oak, and Julianne made her chessboard from birch. Roy, on the other hand, just listened to my instructions and took notes. He really seemed like he wanted to make something, but he just never did. As I started my 3rd batch of students, Roy came along for the 3rd time. Again, he asked,
What do you want to make?
At this point, I was frustrated. I'd make a tool shed, Roy, I said, to put all my other projects in. He lit up with a smile and nodded. I could have said spaceship. He still would have agreed. The other students noticed something was up, and 2 of them didn't come to the 2nd session. 2 more dropped out by the 3rd. By the end of the final session, it was just me, Roy, and 3 people who had nothing to show. They were eager to leave, and I didn't feel like stopping them. Finally, there was only me and Roy left as I cleaned up. As I put away the sign-up sheets, he sat down across from me with a big smile on his face.
I finished it.
He said, and finished what?
The tool shed.
Right, is that where you keep the spice rack and ladder?
Yes.
I laughed, but he didn't. I waited for him to tell me it was a joke. But he was dead serious. He stayed silent, watching me. You're serious, I said. You actually made it, didn't you?
Yes.
He nodded.
Want to go see?
I don't think so, Roy. No offense, but I'm not sure we're that close.
Okay.
He said. As casually as picking up a pack of gum, he suddenly pointed a gun at me.
I want you to see. I need feedback.
It is a strange feeling being so casually threatened. You don't realize the danger at first. Mortality is just this fleeting, abstract concept until you stare down the barrel of a loaded handgun. Suddenly, you remember that you can die. We took my 68 Charger. Roy was slightly larger than I thought, and he had to lean back the passenger seat to fit his legs. Even without pointing the gun at me, I could almost feel it, like a heat radiating towards me. Roy seemed overall pretty calm about the whole thing, but my mind was racing. What was I supposed to do? Ram the car into a tree? I couldn't decide, and before I knew it, we'd been on the road for over an hour. Roy pointed at an exit and told me to follow a dirt road. I could feel my phone buzzing like crazy. My family was getting worried. He still hadn't asked me to turn it off. Maybe they could track me. The road just seemed to go further and further downward. I had to crawl at a slow pace just to spare the suspension. After about 20 minutes, there were more roots and boulders than actual road. The phone stopped buzzing. We were off the grid. I parked the car and stepped out at Roy's instruction. Using a small flashlight, he showed me the way forward. We were deep in the forest, but I could barely hear a single bird. A few chickadees at most.
My sister gets me the materials. She's very resourceful.
Every rolling R seemed to be on the edge of turning into a growl. I peeked behind me, only to see the gun pointing straight at me.
Eyes forward,
He said.
I want your honest first impression.
I could have sworn his eyes were red. At first, I didn't notice the clearing in the woods. There was a strange metallic smell in the air, strong enough for me to taste it. Still no birds, no insects, just a breeze sweeping through the trees.
There,
said Roy.
my tool shed.
The flashlight fell upon something. It looked nothing like a tool shed. In many ways, it looked like nothing I'd ever seen before. Something started boiling up inside of me. That's not wood?
No,
said Roy.
it isn't.
I had to look away, but I felt the gun push me forward.
Look!
I looked. Bones, sinew, muscle, and cartilage. A big, grotesque, hollow square. Every single detail was a nightmare in itself. The skin draped over the door was the last straw for me, and I fell to my knees, covering my face with my hands. Again, the cold steel of a gun pushed against me.
Need you to look at two more things.
Oh God, the spice rack, the ladder. Stepping into that tool shed was like walking into hell. Most of the materials were dry, and there wasn't a single insect anywhere near. With nothing but Roy's flashlight, I only caught quick glimpses of the interior. I tried looking away, but the presence of that gun was enough to force my eyes forward.
There, the spice rack.
He said, please, I saw rows of bony fingers, arranged like they were holding cups, femurs arranged like a ladder. I blinked and turned around to plead for my sanity. Roy wasn't himself. He was at least a foot taller, and his hair had grown longer. He smiled with anticipation, his eyes reflecting a clear shade of red. Small white fragments poked out of his hairline, like pin feathers of a bird, or sharp nails. His fingers seemed longer.
You're useless.
He growled, rolling his tongue.
This was a mistake.
I had to think of something, say something, anything. The shoehorn? I gasped.
What shoehorn?
The first day, I said a shoehorn or a spice rack. Did you ever make the shoehorn?
I could.
Then show me. In an instant, he grabbed my arm, pushed me to the ground, and placed his knee on my back. He was going to break my arm. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice. He was going to make a shoehorn out of my shoulder blade. Wood! You need to make it out of wood! I pleaded. That's the rule.
I make the rules.
He grinned. You're so used to a single material. A true craftsman needs to be able to work a variety of materials. Birch, pine, oak, willow, all kinds.
I can make things you can only dream of.
He bent my arm further like he was trying to snap a carrot. Then do it. Make one. Pine wood, there's plenty of it to go around. He stopped. With a sigh, he let go and stepped off.
Fine.
He moaned.
Wait, Hera.
He pushed me into the shed and closed the door. I fell to the floor, complete darkness. It was like a nest, covered in branches, mud and grass. In fact, it smelled more like mud and grass than anything else. I couldn't help but wonder how something so grotesque could be almost completely without smell. It should have stunk like hell in there, but it didn't. A faint whiff of iron, that was it. The first thing I tried was my phone, but it was no help. There was no reception, and the light did nothing but to bring my nightmares to life. I couldn't stand to see my surroundings, but feeling the walls blindly didn't help either. I couldn't see any weak spots, but I couldn't feel any either. I was stuck. The door was locked. I don't even know how, but I couldn't budge it. The entire shed was sturdy, using some sort of spine dug into the ground as support. I tried feeling my way out in the dark, but all it did was give me an inner picture of what I was actually standing in. After a while, it got so dark that I didn't know if I was closing my eyes or not. I lost track of the door. It all just felt wrong. How can you differentiate a door from a wall when all you see and feel is dry meat and bone? I tried everything. Putting support on my back, I sat down and tried kicking to find weak spots. I tried the ceiling, I tried lifting, wedging, leverage. Nothing. The shed wouldn't budge. It felt like I struggled for an eternity, but it had probably just been an hour. Light or no light, I couldn't get out. My phone just sat there in my hands, useless. I felt it in my chest. That black sinking anxiety of the cold. That feeling when you think you're about to die. I must have sat there frozen for hours. I snapped to attention when I heard a sound outside. It was smaller, careful. Tiny steps. Hello, anyone there? I called out with a dry voice.
And?
It was a boy. Just some boy, in the middle of nowhere. And all he had to say was, "and." I pushed the confusion away, feeling a hope light up. Hey kid, I smiled. You out there? Can you open the door?
And then?
I paused to think. What the hell was this? And then we can go away. You want ice cream? We can get that. We can get whatever you want. Pizza?
And then?
I was about to explode on this kid. He had this infuriating tone, like he was mocking me. Then, suddenly, the door opened. He had the same dark hair as Roy, but was no more than 10 to 13 years old. The same red eyes, the same pale complexion. He was dragging some sort of blue plastic garbage bag.
And then?
He asked again. I don't know what you want. What? I looked around. The coast was clear. I couldn't leave him there. I tried picking him up, but he recoiled. He shook his head and stepped away.
And then?
He said.
And then?
We have to go, I whispered, and come on.
And then?
He said matter-of-factly. He stepped inside the shed and closed the door. I just started running. My car wasn't far off, and I was far quicker on the way back than I'd been getting there. The keys were still in the ignition. The Charger seemed just as eager to get me out of those woods as I'd been getting out of that shed. Together we turned around and drove like maniacs back to the main road. I didn't care about the boulders, roots, vines, and bushes. I had to go now. With a beaten suspension, we managed to get to the main road. I stepped on the gas. I'd rather die in a car crash than anywhere near Roy and his creations. What happened next was a blur. I was pulled over by a highway patrol who noticed I was in shock. I gave a statement about a kidnapping. Trying to explain what I'd seen just made the deputy shake his head. Maybe he didn't believe me, or maybe he'd heard this before. Either way, he made very few notes, barely took my name. I've since shut down that class, and I'm being treated for a stress disorder. I get these stomach cramps, and I have to sleep with the lights on. I have to see that I'm out of that hellhole with my own eyes. When the light disappears, I can't be sure anymore. I'm gonna see a therapist about it soon enough. I've gotten a few recommendations. Not sure I like the idea of overexposure therapy, but whatever works. I haven't heard anything about an investigation, but there have been no reports of murders nearby. Not to the extent that you could build a shed out of the remains, or a spice rack, or a ladder. Wherever Roy got his materials, it must have been from somewhere else. Maybe that kid knew. I think about him a lot. I get the feeling that he wasn't there to rescue me, so much as to just put away that plastic bag of his. But Roy's still out there. That I'm certain of. After all, he sent me a shoehorn in the mail a few